I was halfway under the trailer when I heard my cab door open and close. Not a loose latch, not the wind, but a clean, deliberate sound that did not belong on an empty bridge at 3 in the morning. A trailer tire had blown on the bridge so hard it sounded like a shotgun under the frame, and before the truck had fully settled on the shoulder, I was already looking for a place to stop without losing the trailer to the wind. It was a little after 3 in the morning. The river below was just a black depth under the guardrail, and the bridge felt longer than it ever had in daylight. I killed the engine, set the hazards, grabbed the jack and the tire iron, and went out into the cold. I was halfway under the trailer, one shoulder against freezing steel, trying to seat the jack on the sloped shoulder, when I heard my cab door open and close. I stayed still for a second and told myself the same thing anybody would. Wind. The bridge was taking the truck broadside, and after a blowout, the whole rig can sit wrong for a minute. A latch can shift, a door can move. I'd been awake since before sunset. I was cold, and I was annoyed enough to hear things harder than they happened. Then I heard something from inside the cab that wind does not do. A compartment opened. Papers moved. Something small hit plastic and rolled, then stopped. The sound had rhythm to it, intention. I turned my head and looked up through the gap between the trailer and the tractor, and in the weak amber pulse of my hazards, I caught movement inside my cab. At first it was just a darker shape crossing a dark window, but once I saw it, I could not turn it back into anything else. Somebody was in there, not passing by, not checking if I was alive, not leaning in for a quick grab. The shape moved across the cabin in short, quiet motions and paused where my things were. I had left my phone in the cup holder. My route papers were on the passenger seat. My duffel was behind me. All of it was in there with whoever had just climbed into my truck while I was under it. I checked my jacket by feel and found the keys in my pocket, which meant they could not drive away, but that did not help much. It only meant I was stranded on the shoulder of a bridge with my only warm place a few feet away and already occupied. I tried to keep my head in the practical part of itself. There are thieves who work truck stops and ramps. There are desperate people who see a stopped vehicle and take a chance. I had a tire iron in one hand. I told myself if I made enough noise, the person would bolt. So I hit the underside of the trailer once with the iron, hard enough that the whole frame rang, and I shouted, "Get out of my truck!" The wind tore half the words away. Inside the cab, the figure stopped moving for a moment. I waited for panic, for a door to fly open, for footsteps on the metal step, for a curse, for anything that belonged to a normal person caught doing something stupid. None of that came. After a few seconds, the shape moved again, calm as before, and started going through my things with the same slow care. That was the point where the whole night changed shape. A thief grabs and goes. A scared man jumps out and runs. This one handled things like they mattered for reasons I did not understand. I watched a hand lift my logbook, hold it still for a moment, then let it fall. The glove box opened and shut. My flashlight was picked up, turned in the dark, then set back down. Once the figure leaned toward the passenger side, and I thought it had found my phone, but I never saw the screen light up. It was not searching the way hungry people search. It was touching my life one piece at a time, like it was learning the outline of someone it had not met yet. Then it crossed back over, lowered itself into the driver's seat, and went still. I have spent enough hours in a truck to know how a seat sounds when weight settles into it. I heard the spring give once. After that, there was almost nothing. The hazards flashed over the window. The bridge groaned under passing traffic. Spray hissed under the trailer every time a car went by too fast in the next lane. Inside the cab, the shape sat upright, facing the wheel, not looking into the mirrors, not checking the road, not trying the ignition, just looking at the steering wheel like there was something there only it could see. The cold had started to climb through my knees and elbows by then. My gloves were stiff. The wet grit under me had soaked through one sleeve. I wanted my phone. I wanted heat. I wanted to stand up and be done with it. But that stillness in the driver's seat kept me where I was. A thief would have taken something and gone. I had to shift after a while because my right hand was going numb around the tire iron. I moved a few inches under the trailer, slow enough that the gravel barely ticked, and that put me closer to the tractor side. From there, I could see more of the cab through the lower corner of the window. The figure was clearer now, though not clearer in any way that helped. Shoulders square, head slightly bent, hands low. Waiting posture. That was worse than any rush of movement could have been. It was not hiding from me. It was not hunting for me either. It was occupying the one place in the world I returned to without thinking. I remember feeling the cold metal smell from the jack in my nose, the taste of old diesel and river damp in the back of my throat, and the ache in my fingers where they clamped the iron too hard. Then I heard one short metallic sound from inside the cab, firm and deliberate, like something being pushed through resistance. I did not move. I did not breathe right. The thought came into my head whole and finished. It wasn't trying to take the truck. It was waiting for me to come back to it. I stayed under that trailer until dawn. There is no brave version of that. I did not crawl out and challenge anybody. I did not make a run for the passenger side. I lay in the road filth with a tire iron in both hands and watched the cab between bursts of traffic until the black river turned gray and the bridge rail took shape again. By then, my legs hurt from being folded under me. My face felt cut raw by the cold, and the feeling in my fingers came and went in sharp, burning waves. When the highway patrol car pulled in behind the trailer, I almost cried from relief, though what came out of me sounded more like coughing. The officer came up fast, one hand near his belt, and I must have looked half dead crawling out from under there. I told him somebody had been in my cab all night. Even to my own ears, it sounded thin, like a story cold had made bigger. He looked at the truck, looked at me, and said, "Let's open it." The cab was empty. No broken glass, no dropped bag, no wet footprints that made sense. My phone was on the passenger seat where I had last seen it. My papers were scattered but not stolen. My duffel was unzipped. For 1 second, the officer had the look people get when they are deciding whether you panicked yourself into seeing things. Then he reached toward the driver's seat and stopped. He put his hand on the cushion and looked at me differently. It was still warm. Not cab warm from yesterday, not sun warm, not trapped heat from old fabric. Warm like somebody had just stood up. Then we both saw the knife. It was an old hunting knife, long, rusted, ugly with age, buried deep in the dashboard directly in front of the steering wheel. The blade had gone in hard enough to crack the plastic around it. I knew that sound then. That was what I had heard from under the trailer in the dark. Not random, not imagined. Something had sat in my seat for hours and marked the spot where my eyes always go. The worst part was not that it had been there. The worst part was knowing it had stayed there without needing anything from me except for me to climb back in. For a long time after that, every stop before dawn felt wrong. I would open the cab, keep one hand on the handle, and check the seat before I got in. Not to see if anyone was there, to see if it was still holding heat that did not belong to me. I have been driving long enough to know when a road is wrong, and the first wrong thing that night was not the fog or the trees. It was the toll booth. I had come off the interstate a little after 2 in the morning because a pileup ahead had everything locked solid. The CB was full of brake lights, jackknife trailers, and state police. I do not use GPS, never have. I keep paper maps in the door pocket, and most nights I know the roads well enough to feel where I am without looking. There was an old back road I remembered from years earlier, a dirt cut through the trees that could put me back near the main route. I took it because I trusted my own head more than a glowing screen. 10 minutes into that forest road, with my dry van rocking behind me and branches hanging low over the cab, my headlights found an old, rusted highway toll booth sitting dead center in the dark, like it had been waiting for me. I slowed because my brain needed a second to accept what my eyes were showing it. The road was mud-edged and narrow, no lines, no reflectors, no power poles, nothing but dense trees and patches of ground fog. There should not have been any kind of booth out there, let alone one that looked like it had been left behind by another decade. The paint was blistered and peeling, the glass was cloudy. A single lamp above the window gave off a weak yellow light. The barrier arm was wood, not metal, and striped by hand in faded red. Then the booth window slid open and the attendant leaned forward. The uniform looked old, maybe 70s old, with a cap that sat too square on the head. For 1 second, the face just looked tired. Then I noticed how still it was. No blink, no shift, just a flat look, like it had already seen me coming from farther away than the road allowed. I stopped short of the barrier and reached for my wallet mostly out of habit, annoyed more than afraid. The attendant spoke in a calm voice that sounded dry, almost papery under the engine idle. "The toll." I asked how much. It answered right away. "A piece of your cargo or a piece of your memory?" I remember letting out one short laugh because that was such a stupid thing to hear in a place like that. I said something like, "Yeah, no," and looked past the booth for any sign of a shack, another car, a flashlight, anybody else playing games in the woods. There was nothing. Just the light over the window, the barrier, and that face, watching me like it had all the time in the world. I put the truck in gear, told it to move if it valued its legs, and when it did not, I hit the pedal. The wooden arm snapped with a hard, splintering crack and slapped across the mirror as I pushed through. For the next 10 miles, I treated it like a bad little story I would tell later. Some local lunatic in costume, a hunting camp prank, maybe an abandoned county toll relic somebody had dragged out there as a joke. I kept one hand on the wheel and one eye on the map under the dome light when the road straightened enough. The page told me I should have been coming out near pavement by then. Instead, the trees kept closing over me. The dirt stayed wet. The ruts stayed deep. My headlights kept catching the same kind of white fog and the same low spots between the trunks. So I started watching the odometer. That, at least, could not play games. When it rolled another 10 miles, the road bent left through a bank of mist, and the exact same booth appeared again. Same lamp, same crack in the window, same warped barrier arm dropped across the road. Same place where no toll booth had any right to be. That was when I felt the first real drop in my stomach. I pulled up slower this time and studied everything like I could force a difference into it. The attendant stepped into the window light again. The uniform was the same, but the person inside it was not. The face looked tighter, as if the skin had been pulled wrong over the bones. The eyes caught my headlights with a dull shine that human eyes do not keep for that long. There was anger in it now, but not hot anger, something colder, more settled. I opened the map again. I checked my mirrors. I looked for a sidetrack, a logging cut, anything. There was a narrow path to the right, barely more than 2 muddy lines through brush, and I took it hard enough to jolt the trailer. It ran beside the trees for maybe a mile, then curved back onto the same road. 10 miles later, the booth was there again. This time I did not need to read the sign on the barrier. I knew the grain in the wood. The second time it spoke, it used the same words, but the voice sounded flatter. A piece of your cargo, or a piece of your memory. I told it I was carrying sealed freight that did not belong to me. I told it I had no authority to open the trailer. It said nothing to that. It just kept looking at me. I tried to keep moving without a full stop, thinking maybe speed was the answer. But the closer I got, the more the air changed around the truck. The fog thickened right in front of the grill. The light from the booth stayed clear while everything else turned white and dead. I could smell wet dirt through the vents, and beneath that, a stale odor like old paper left in a damp attic. My palms were getting slick on the steering wheel, and the heater suddenly felt weak against the cold pressing through the glass. I drove through the barrier again because I could not think of another move, and the wood burst apart exactly like before. Not weaker, not stronger, the same. By the time the booth found me for the third time, the road no longer felt like a road. It felt like a narrow corridor built only to return me there. I was breathing through my mouth without meaning to. My shoulders hurt from how hard I had been holding the wheel. The cab smelled like hot dust from the vents and cold mud from outside. Every few seconds I would wipe one hand on my jeans because the sweat kept coming back. When the booth lamp emerged through the fog again, I did not curse. I did not argue. I just felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The attendant was waiting before I stopped, face pale and dry in the light, mouth too still between words, cap shadow cutting across the eyes. The toll. That same pause. Then, a piece of your cargo or a piece of your memory. And that was when it finally landed. It wasn't asking twice. It was collecting. I knew I could not give it cargo. That was not mine to give, and some part of me still clung to that dumb working rule because it was the only normal thing left in the cab. So I reached into my shirt pocket for the watch. It had belonged to my father, small, round, old, heavier than it looked. I carried it every night, not because I needed it, but because he had, and because there are habits you keep long after the reason becomes personal instead of practical. The metal felt warm from my body. I could feel the smooth, worn edges where his thumb must have touched it for years before mine did. My fingers did not want to let go. Outside, the booth lamp buzzed faintly. The engine idled under me. Somewhere in the trees, nothing moved at all. I rolled the window down into freezing air, and the attendant's face turned toward me without blinking. I did not throw the watch hard. I just let it leave my hand. The instant it crossed the edge of the window, the booth, the barrier, the lamp, and the figure all vanished into the fog like something erased from glass. The road ahead was empty. Not opened, not cleared, just empty. As if nothing had ever stood there. I drove. I do not remember the next stretch clearly except for the way the trees finally began to thin and the dirt gave way to real pavement under the tires. Dawn started to lift behind the clouds, turning everything the flat gray color of used steel. When I reached the main road again, I had to pull onto the shoulder because my hands were shaking too badly to keep steady pressure on the wheel. I sat there, listening to normal traffic in the distance, and told myself the same thing over and over. You are out. You are back. You paid with the watch. That is all. I even felt a little relief then. Not joy, nothing like that. Just the small, ugly relief of a man who thinks he has bought his way out of something with an object he loved but could survive without. Then I tried to think of my father. Not in some deep emotional way, just the ordinary way. The quick way a face comes when you already know it by heart. I waited for it and got nothing. I knew facts. I knew he wore that watch. I knew he had given it to me. I knew there had been a kitchen table, a laugh, work rough hands, a smell of tobacco on an old coat. But when I reached for the face itself, there was only a blank space where it should have arrived instantly. I tried harder and felt panic begin to spread. I could not hear his voice. I could not remember a single full moment with him from start to finish. I knew I had loved him. I knew he had loved me. But every memory attached to that watch was gone, cleanly gone, like pages lifted out of a book without tearing the spine. I sat there, in the first light of morning on a normal road with trucks passing somewhere ahead, staring at my empty hand and trying to picture the man who had filled it once. The worst part was that I could still feel the weight of the watch in my palm. I just could not remember the face of the one who placed it there. The first thing I thought was that I had missed another truck somehow. That was not a small thought on my first solo cross-country fuel run. I had been checking mirrors so often my eyes were starting to ache from it, because that was the kind of driver I was then. I followed every rule, every spacing guideline, every speed note from training. A loaded tanker does not forgive confidence. It barely forgives normal mistakes. The highway was perfectly straight, running through black desert with no moon and no buildings anywhere, just my headlights, my gauges, and the guardrail on the right. Then a shape formed ahead of me, too big to be a car and too dark to make sense. It was a semi. No company name, no side glow, no headlights. Before I had time to understand that, I checked my mirror and found another one behind me, just as black. And when I looked left, there was a third truck pacing my cab like it had been there all along. I remember keying the CB with a hand that still felt steady then. I kept my voice professional because that was what training does to you. Driver on my left, driver ahead. You got a problem? Nothing came back. Not a joke, not static shaped like a person, nothing. I tried again, this time to all three of them. Still nothing. The truck ahead held its position. The one behind stayed centered in my mirror. The one on my left stayed so perfectly level with me that I could only see pieces of it at a time. The front corner of the trailer, the dark line of the cab, then nothing when the glass caught my own reflection. I eased off the throttle a little to let them sort themselves out. The truck ahead slowed, the one behind slowed. The one on my left held even with my door. I brought my speed back up. They came up with me, smooth and exact, like my foot was connected to all three. At that point, I still wanted a normal answer. Maybe they were some convoy with dead wiring. Maybe the desert had a way of flattening distance and making them look stranger than they were. I told myself that because the other option was harder to say out loud, even to myself. I checked every instrument, every pressure reading, every mirror angle. Everything in my tanker was fine. The road stayed arrow straight. There was no exit, no shoulder worth using, no sign for a rest area or a service road. Just guardrail on the right and empty black land beyond it. Then I noticed something that made it harder to keep lying to myself. The truck in front was bleeding speed in tiny, careful steps, but I never saw brake lights. It was just there, a larger black shape growing slower in the dark, and the truck behind me was closing the gap with the same patience. I hit the horn. It sounded weak in all that open dark, like it had nowhere to go. The truck on my left began inching closer, not swerving, not aggressive the way real road rage gets aggressive. It moved with the kind of control you use when docking a trailer, calm and deliberate. I could see almost nothing of it except a dull, flat wall where the trailer should have caught some light and did not. My driver's side mirror started to feel useless because the truck was too close for a full view and too black for details. I called on the CB again. I said I was hauling fuel. I said I needed room. I said if there was a game here, it had gone far enough. No answer. The left truck kept sliding in. The one ahead kept trimming speed. The one behind kept closing the hole behind my tanker. That was when I understood this was not some silent pack cruising together. They were shaping my lane. Once I understood that, every option got ugly. I could not drift right. The guardrail was already too close, flashing silver in the edge of my headlight beam. I could not just stop. Not with a tanker full behind me and a truck sitting on my rear. I could not outrun them because the front truck was choosing how fast the road moved. I thought about putting 2 wheels onto the shoulder, but there barely was a shoulder, just dirt and drop-off and whatever waited beyond the beam. I thought about forcing the truck on my left away from me, but if I misjudged that in a fuel tanker, I could turn the whole night into a fire report. So I kept driving because that was the trap. They had managed to make steady, safe trucking feel like the worst choice and the only choice at the same time. The more carefully I behaved, the tighter they built the box around me. A few minutes later, there was no doubt left. The left trailer was close enough that I could feel its size more than see it, a moving wall pressing air against my cab. The truck ahead had taken away almost all my comfortable following distance. The one behind was so near I stopped checking the mirror because it only showed darkness with shape inside it. The cab got hot, even though I had the air on. My palms were slick. My mouth had gone dry. I could smell hot dust from the vents, engine heat, and that sharp, dry smell brakes get when they have been used too much for too long. The steering wheel had a faint vibration in it from the road and from my own grip, and the tanker behind me gave off little metallic knocks as the load shifted with every correction. I watched the guardrail flash by on the right and understood exactly what they were doing. They were not trying to scare me. They were trying to press me into it and let the tanker do the rest. The thought came clear and simple. If I stayed predictable, they would finish the job. I did the one thing training had spent weeks warning me never to do unless there was no other choice. I stood on the brakes. Not a gradual squeeze, not a careful reduction, hard. Hard enough that the belt locked against my chest and the whole cab dipped. The pedal pushed back under my boot with a stiff, ugly resistance, and the tanker hit me a fraction later, heavy and alive, the load surging forward with a deep, rolling force that made the frame groan. The steering wheel shook in my hands. For 1 second, I thought I had made the wrong choice and was about to jackknife myself into the same guardrail they had been feeding me to. Then the space changed. The black truck on my left did not brake with me. The one ahead did not flash lights or grow closer. The one behind did not slam into my trailer. I fought the wheel, kept the tractor straight, felt the tanker wag once and then settle, and when I finally got enough control to look around, the road was empty. No headlights in front, no shape behind, no black wall at my left. Just highway, guardrail, and desert dark like the last 20 minutes had been scraped away. I did not stop after that. I kept driving because motion was easier than thinking. My legs were shaking so badly I had to wedge my boot against the floor to hold steady speed. And every few minutes I checked the mirrors, expecting one of those trucks to flow back into them. They did not. The highway stayed empty for hours. When the first gas station finally appeared out of the dark near dawn, the canopy lights looked almost fake, too bright, too ordinary. I pulled in under them and sat there with the engine idling longer than I should have. I wanted coffee, a bathroom, another human face, any proof that the world still worked by the same rules it had before midnight. Then I looked across the lot and saw the 3 black trucks parked in a row at the far edge where the light fell weak and yellow. They were all there. One in front, one behind it, one offset to the left like they had chosen to stop in the same pattern they used on the road. Up close they were even worse because daylight was starting to touch them, and still they gave almost nothing back. No company names, no route numbers, no stickers, no signs of drivers climbing down or resting inside. I got out and walked toward them on legs that did not feel connected to me. All 3 cabs were empty. Windows dark, doors shut. No engine heat. No sound at all except the ticking of my own tanker cooling behind me. Dust coated their trailers in a fine, pale layer, and somebody, or something, had drawn symbols into that dust with a finger, or maybe several fingers. Not words, not numbers. Shapes that looked deliberate and old and impossible to mistake for random marks. I stared at them long enough to know I was not going to call dispatch and try to explain any of it. I was not going to climb back into a tanker that night, or any other night, and pretend the road was still just road. I went back to my truck, took my bag from the cab, left the keys in the ignition, and quit on the spot. The strangest part was that when I walked away, what stayed with me was not the symbols. It was the smell of hot brakes and desert dust in the morning air, and the certainty that the 3 trucks had only looked empty because whatever drove them no longer needed to sit inside.